Back into Cougar Sports Saturday. Kyle Ireland and Mitch Harper here at Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium in Greenville, North Carolina. Mitch, it's interesting as we were walking in today, I kind of had a thought that, 5 years ago, there were probably a number of the fans in the BYU faithful that wished that this might have been a conference game, wishing that, out of independence, they would have been in an American program. And it's crazy to see how different things have played out for BYU over the past few seasons. And now this is the game that, BYU probably closes out the chapter and doesn't ever play here again, as we watch BYU and East Carolina about to take the field in about 2.5 hours.
Yeah, they wandered the wilderness in Independence, and there were times when people in the BYU fan base thought, hey, maybe that American conference would be a pretty good landing spot if the power conference never came calling. But obviously it all worked out for BYU being in the Big 12. And I wonder long term what will ever happen with ECU's landing spot going forward with the American, if there's ever the domino shift and they land somewhere. But it's a big game for BYU today, and they go into this game as a favorite. I think a lot of Cougar fans this week have been feeling a little uneasy about this game because you factor in the travel, you factor in the first road game, a true freshman quarterback, all these cliches. But I think one of the things that I believe will show up for BYU is their defense. I think BYU's defense is one of the best in college football this year, and I want to see that show up. BYU has got a lot of talent on that side of the ball, and their defensive line in particular, I think, has got to be really good. It'll be interesting to see if we see Justin Kirkland today, who's been banged up with a knee injury. Will he give it a go? It's still been to be determined on his status, whether or not he's going to actually play. He did practice last week in the bye and this week, but will we actually see him play? Keanu Tanavasa and John Talmoy-Payau have been excellent for BYU in the interior this season, but Kirkland, I think, just kind of rounds out the group and would be a nice boost for this group that's been really good. And then I think on the defensive end spot, I want to see some of those defensive ends get home and generate some sacks. Logan Latui, Bodie Schoonover, Viliami Puha, none of those guys have generated a sack yet. And it's going to be tough to do that against East Carolina, who they get the ball off so quick that this is probably not the game to determine success based on sacks. It's more about keeping them out of the end zone and getting some takeaways. But I want to see a little bit more success from the defensive ends. And Logan Latui's been pretty good this year with some tackles for loss, but getting home when opportunities arise would be huge for this team. But I want to see BYU's defense, that I believe is one of the best in the Big 12 and maybe nationally, show up today, because this will be a good challenge for them.
Yeah, I think this defense is one of those things that you can bank on this season, Mitch. We've expected the play that they've put out throughout the first two games, and obviously those opponents probably aren't even at the level of East Carolina. This is a good football team. I don't think that Cougar Nation is underestimating or underrating this team, at least from what I've seen and read and have felt from the fan base. I think that especially maybe the 2017 result, the 22 result, like those losses linger in the fan base, and I think that that has also carried into the mind of Kalani Sitake and not taking this trip lightly. This BYU team, I think, is locked in. I think that they're almost having the same mindset maybe that they did a season ago, where they're trying to prove people wrong. There's a little bit of a chip on the shoulder, and I think that as you've seen some disappointment maybe at the tail end of last season, the way that they responded to close out the year, the bowl game, and even through the first 2 weeks. I mean, the Portland State game. That game was, just a complete domination. And then there was even some disappointment with a big win over, a 3-touchdown win over Stanford. This team is hungry. They want more. And I think that even, with the success that they've had so far, they're continuing to try and find another level to get to. And I think that this is another good opportunity to, see something different from an East Carolina offense that you haven't seen this season, and to try and maybe round out things as far as how your play style is, and get prepared as you head into Big 12 play a week from now.
When you talk about levels, I think that's something that kind of catches my attention about this, how the schedule's played out so far. It's been starting from the ground up with Portland State, then a tougher challenge with a Power 4 team in Stanford, who maybe is a little bit better than we thought. I still don't know if they're a bold team, but maybe a little bit better. And then you go with a challenging road game, and then you get into Big 12 play. So this is the last level before conference play when it really matters. And I just think that BYU in this game too, they've got to come out with a strong start in this game as well. I think that's going to be critical for BYU. If they can have on that first offensive series, not even a touchdown or a field goal, but just a couple first downs, because I just think this is going to be an insane environment to begin. Just let Bear Bachmeier experience a little bit of success. The last thing I want to see for BYU's offense is 3 and out early on, because then some doubt starts to creep in. Chase Roberts hit on it after the Stanford game. It's taking time still to develop that chemistry between the receivers and Bear Bachmeier, and without JoJo Phillips in this wide receiver unit now, there's a little bit of how is this all going to play itself out? So having some early success, I think, would bode well for BYU. But I do believe that defense, like I said earlier, is going to have is going to show up, and I think that they're going to be tested. I'm really curious to see how BYU attacks the up tempo attack of East Carolina. There just haven't been many up tempo teams that Jay Hill has faced since he's been at BYU in 2023. So it's a very unique challenge, and I think it helps the fact that BYU did have an extra week to get ready for this one. And I want to see what new looks BYU brings into this game. Is this a game where you bring in some specials that Aaron Roderick has been well known for? Do you work in Parker Kingston into that regard? So it's a good matchup, but ultimately, though, Kyle, I think BYU is the better football team. I think they got more depth. I think the trenches is where BYU wins this game. The return of Waylon Lopwaho on the offensive line is huge for BYU. I think Keanu Tanavasa has been excellent this season for the Cougars. He had a sack against Stanford. The pressures he was generating against Portland State. Keanu Tanavasa is excellent. Even a ECU student last night was telling you he even knew about Keanu Tanavasa. I was pretty impressed. He was doing his scouting report on BYU. Tanavasa is going to be hard for ECU to handle it. And ECU's got size on their offensive line, but I think Tanavasa is going to be a force. So uh, as we kind of get closer to kickoff, we're about 2.5 hours away until kickoff. What's your score prediction for BYU and East Carolina?
Yeah, I'm going to say 27-17 BYU gets the win. I do think that you're going to see a little bit of a defensive force from BYU, maybe a late touchdown for ECU, late field goal from them. I do think BYU controls the game from start to finish, Mitch. I'm not that concerned about the result of the game. I'm concerned about how BYU gets there. I do think that the offensive side of things is where I would put the most amount of, I guess, caution to BYU fans. I haven't seen enough throughout the first two games to really get a good read on what I expect from this offense other than LJ Martin. LJ Martin's the one that I would trust, I would lean on. I expect him to have a big game today. I really do think that the way that LJ plays, the way that he goes, the way that he performs, I think that that's how BYU is going to go this season. I do think that that is also how this game is going to go as well.
I am curious too to see how much work Bear Bachmeier factors in with the tight ends, Carson Ryan.
Yeah.
This tight end unit outside of Carson Ryan, is there anyone else that's a receiving threat? I don't know yet. Kean Need's probably that number 2 tight end, but he's more a blocker. Do you have any other options at that tight end position that you could go to? Because again, I think the absence of JoJo Phillips is pretty noteworthy for this receiver unit and this BYU offense at large. But like you, Kyle, I'm going to go with BYU in this game. I think BYU's defense will show up, like I said, and I think they're going to hold ECU to 13 points. I think ECU will get yards, but I think BYU will tighten up. If they get into BYU territory, East Carolina's offense, and again, I said earlier, I think BYU is going to generate. My bold prediction was three interceptions, 3 takeaways. So I think BYU wins. I think it's going to be a little bit lower scoring because I think BYU is going to try to control the clock. I think BYU 24, East Carolina 13. I think BYU gets out of Greenville with a big road win and sets the stage for Big 12 play with an undefeated record once again.
Yeah, I think the thing that I really want to watch from the offensive side of things, I want to see a good flow to the game, Mitch.
Yeah.
I feel like that was the thing that's been missing so far through the first two games. I just want to see a nice rhythm from the offense, whether Bear's throwing it all over the place or LJ Martin's running the ball really well. I just want to see some consistent flow. I don't want to see anything where it's like, man, like what happened there? Almost like the first possession of Stanford that I mentioned earlier on in the show. It's just like that kind of just throws things off. I hope that BYU has used the bye week to work some of those things out. I think that the other thing that I would also, throw caution to the wind is, this East Carolina passing attack. I think that really the thing that I'm interested to see is the cornerback rotation. We we kind of talked about it with Kalani Sitake last week, was Maury Bamba and that rotation with him and Trey Alexander and Evan Johnson. What does that rotation look like today? Are we going to see more playing time from Maury Bamba than we have the first 2 weeks? Is it really locked in with Trey Alexander, Evan Johnson? I think that those three are going to be tested today on the outside.
It's a big game. BYU and East Carolina kickoff at 5:30 p.m. We will have coverage throughout the night here on KSL News Radio. You can listen to the call on the KSL News Radio app, 102.7 FM, 1160 AM, KSLSports.com, the KSL Sports app. So many different ways to listen to BYU football. And of course, you can watch the game on ESPN2 as well. We will have coverage from inside Dowdy Ficklin Stadium here on KSLSports.com. So check out our bylines and video content after the game as well. So it's BYU and ECU. Appreciate all of you for tuning into the show. We will talk to you next week here on Cougar Sports Saturday. And make sure to listen to Cougar Tracks throughout the week. Coming up next week, it's the Cougs and the Pirates here on KSL.